Shabbat Shalom. A very quick introduction. You know, Abraham is known for the binding of Isaac, perhaps the open tent that Melanie mentioned earlier. But one of the other things he was a warrior. That when his nephew Lot was captured, he led an army across many miles to defeat 4 or 5 other armies in order to get him back. Additionally, in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, we learn that Abraham is also a lawyer. God tells Abraham, you know, I'm going to destroy these cities. And Abraham says, well, let's discuss it a little bit first, and tries to negotiate a better sentence for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So it is fitting that on this Shabbat, in which we remember Veterans Day, that we have Colonel OREN LEFF, who I read his bio 3 times, and I still am not entirely sure what he does. But he's definitely in the Air Force, and he's definitely a lawyer. There's a lot of acronyms involved, but we were very blessed to hear some of his story and some wisdom from him this morning, Colonel OREN LEFF. I also want to thank his daughter. She fixed his tie earlier, and it looks much better now.
So the cantor asked me if he should put the step down for me. And I'm actually thinking now that I'm up here, he probably should have. And I just thank the bat mitzvah girl for allowing me to share her day. This is a very special day, or a very special weekend, because it happens to also be Veterans Day. So it is very opportune for you as a bat mitzvah. There's a tremendous number of lessons, hopefully, that you will walk away from. And as my daughter, my oldest daughter, not this one, although this one might be the most mature of the group, I have a 14-year-old at home who was bat mitzvahed last year. And when asked, what does this mean, and why are you having a bat mitzvah, I presume you are very similar to my daughter in that she said, I don't know. My parents wanted me to do this. But hopefully one day I will know, and so hopefully some of these words will resonate with you at some point in the future about how you choose to live your life. So before I begin, I want to say hello. There's a number of guests via live stream, one of whom is out in the Pacific on a guided missile destroyer. He's a friend of mine who I worked with over in Italy when I was at the Joint Force Command Naples. Hopefully he got himself out of his rack. They're 5 hours or 6 hours before us, so it's pretty early in the morning for him. And when he found out I was speaking, he said, whoa, 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 this isn't going to be as long as your promotion speech, is it? And I didn't say anything because he was doing it all in email, and whenever we do talk, we tend to argue anyways. And he's one of the most brilliant individuals that I know. And he went ahead and said, but I'm going to make an exception today because of the import of this particular holiday. And so hopefully my words to each of you remind us all a little something about Veterans Day and the meaning of this weekend beyond just a day off and a lovely parade downtown. So, and Rabbi, I hope I don't let you down. I know there's a lot of pressure on me and also on the rabbi. This could be his job if this doesn't go well. So, okay. And I do apologize. This may be a little lengthy, but hopefully you laugh, you cry, and you feel all the emotions you could feel in one talk. Citation presented to Technical Sergeant Abraham B. Lobel in 1945. On this 15th day of April, 1945, the fickle finger of fate finds it expedient to trace on the roll of the Lucky Bastards Club the name of Tech Sergeant Abraham B. Lobel, engineer gunner on the Flying Fortress, Lonesome Lads, for having this day achieved the remarkable record of sallying forth and returning no less than 25 times, for having braved the hazards of Hun flak, for bringing to Hitler and his cronies tons of bombs, for bending the Luftwaffe's back, all through the courtesy of the 8th Army Air Forces, who sponsors these programs in the interest of liberty-loving people everywhere, 447th Bomb Group. Abe Lobel stepped off his plane, the Lonesome Lads, following its latest bombing run over Germany with a massive gash in his forearm from the flak that had torn up their B-17 yet again. Abe never reported this wound, as he knew how lucky he was serving as one of the Lonesome Lads. If he reported his injury, he would have to report to the infirmary for treatment, and he would have, at least temporarily, been removed from flying status. And there was no guarantee that when he returned to flying, he would have been placed back into his original crew. The 447th Bomb Group was part of 8th Army Air Forces, and on any given bombing run over Germany, there were so many B-24s and B-17s taking off from bases all over England that you could line the bombers up for nearly 100 miles wingtip to wingtip. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, if you were based in Shreveport, Louisiana, there was a bomber wingtip to wingtip all the way to Dallas. Every single time they took off. Unfortunately, combat losses for the 8th Army Air Forces were the highest of any American combat unit of any service. The air crews had a higher chance of being killed, wounded, or captured than the infantry on the front lines. On average, 6,600 American airmen died per month during World War II, which is about 220 airmen a day. And by the end of the war, over 40,000 airmen were killed in combat theaters and another 18,000 wounded. Abe Lobel rarely spoke about how he was wounded, and he never received a Purple Heart or any other recognition for his injuries. What he ultimately received was his life. He was truly one of the lucky bastards who returned home following the war. Abe Lobel happens to be my great uncle, and I could not be more honored and humbled to have been assigned 50 years later to the same command, the mighty 8th Air Forces, in which my great uncle Abe fought for our freedom today. Today, or actually yesterday, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we celebrated Veterans Day. We are honoring those military veterans who have paid the ultimate sacrifice to our nation. Today we honor all veterans, both alive and deceased. We honor their service and sacrifice and their loss, and I hope that each of us takes a few moments this weekend to ponder what it means in the United States to have a Veterans Day and a Memorial Day. There are moments in time we should be truly thankful for those who have sacrificed simply so that we may have these moments. I stood last week in my office wondering what I would say to you this morning, and just then my pondering was interrupted by a late afternoon ritual on every U.S. military installation, the national anthem, a reminder of the nation in which we live and the sacrifice it takes to ensure we continue to be an exceptional society, unique from our international peers. It's a simple anthem. It's played daily, a moment for each and every service member to stop and reflect on the magnificence of our nation for which we each sacrifice. I'm reminded at this time of how the Talmud tells us that we Jews are still within the generations that benefit from the righteousness of Abraham. So too do I stand on the shoulders of giants. I stand on the shoulders of my great-uncle Abe, my great-uncle Dave, who occupied the Japanese mainland following the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, my great-cousin Bernie, a buck sergeant at the Battle of the Bulge, who took shrapnel to his back and a bullet in his neck. He remained in an Army hospital for over a year, recovering, only to cough up the bullet years later, as the surgeons would not operate on him because the bullet had been lodged too close to his spinal cord. These are the veterans. These are the Jewish veterans who fought for freedom and liberty for all of us in America. And these are the veterans who sacrifice now to preserve our rights for tomorrow. As a veteran of our armed forces and as a Jew, I'm honored to be here with each of you this morning. About 6 years ago, I had one of the most emotionally satisfying weeks of my life. I took my now 14-year-old very focused, extremely focused. I took her with me to Florida to visit my then 87-year-old Uncle Dave for Veterans Day. So we did so much more. We spoke with veteran after veteran at the assisted living home who shared the stories of pride in having served our great nation, from the 100-year-old Army sergeant who received shrapnel wound to his head just before the Battle of the Bulge. He described for me how he refused to leave his unit, and he spent 2 to 3 days lying motionless in his foxhole. A star came to his eyes when we spoke, and he said, "I used to dig the best foxholes." If anyone knows what a foxhole is, it's not a comfortable place to lie in for 2 to 3 days. So on the way home, I met a veteran at the airport. Turns out he was removed from a body bag, having been cast off as dead. He lost both of his legs in Vietnam. He described for me with great pride how he subsequently received his degree in exercise physiology. He went on to become a champion powerlifter. He set 4 world records, and he became a strength coach for the Green Bay Packers. He now serves as a motivational speaker. These are the individuals and many others just like them who paid the ultimate sacrifice and service who I'm honoring this morning. These are the veteran. It is the veteran, not the preacher, who has given us and preserves us freedom of religion. It is the veteran, not the reporter, who has given us and preserves us freedom of the press. It is the veteran, not the poet, who has given us and preserves us freedom of speech. It's the veteran, not the campus organizer, who has given us and preserves us freedom to assemble. It is the veteran, not a lawyer, who has given us and preserves us the right to a fair trial. And it is the veteran, not the politician, who has given us and preserves us the right to vote. It's the veteran who serves under the flag of the United States of America, one flag which unites us all. The status of veteran, it's an equalizer. Being a veteran applies regardless of your race, your color, religion, sexual orientation, or any other distinguishing characteristic that society might place upon each individual. Once one has earned the status of veteran by serving our great nation, one becomes united with a unique class of Americans from every generation. Although experiences differ somewhat, from training methods to weaponry to unit names to cheers such as hua or hoorah, or in our little world, oy vey for that matter, right? Oy. I don't know, maybe the Israeli military, oy. The reality is veterans of all generations share a bond that binds us together throughout time. The veteran is an individual who, along with his or her family, experiences hardships most individuals simply take for granted. They often rotate assignments and move from one community to another as frequently as every 1 to 3 years, subjecting their families, this young lady, to new homes, neighborhoods, friends, schools. My 14-year-old's in her 6th school in 6 years. This one is in her 5th school in 6 years. Their personal property is often lost or damaged at the hands of the lowest but deemed capable mover, of which I'm currently dealing with, the household goods claim. Super fun. Finding continuity in one's home life is sometimes extremely difficult, especially due to deployments and training, and the emotional stress incurred by the veteran's partner before, during, and after a soldier, sailor, coastie, marine, or airman's deployment is perhaps just as bad, if not worse psychologically for them as it is for the one who's away fighting. And to give you an example, 9 years ago on May 11th, I spent most of the year, May 11th, 2013, I was in Afghanistan. This young lady was born, and I met her at 3 months old. And while I was watching, I had to then close up my computer and go and deal with a 107 round attack. And what was that like for my wife, who was in the hospital dealing with this one, who is always well-behaved, as I'm sure each of you can imagine. And the eye roll gives it away as well. So as veterans, we have all experienced military training and discipline to one extent or another, and we have all had the uncomfortable honor of wearing this superb-fitting polyester uniform of one version or another. More importantly, We've all experienced war to one extent or another. And whether as part of World War I, World War II, the Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the War on Terror, or various conflicts in between, the veteran has experienced war from a perspective that a non-veteran could simply never have. Some time ago, I heard a Marine officer explain a problem his troops were having in discussing their experiences in Iraq. He stated that explaining combat and our stories to family and friends back home is somewhat like explaining the color red to someone who is colorblind. As this is an unfortunate but true statement, I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to stand here today to honor our men and women who have served or serve currently in the armed forces by speaking with you this very morning. And if I do the rest of my job correctly, with any luck, hopefully my speaking and your listening will end at approximately the same time, and chances are my friend Commander Beer, who is over in Hawaii, may be able to get some extra sleep this morning. So my 24 years in the military have thus far provided me a tremendous professional satisfaction. As all veterans will tell you, every role in the military is extremely important. Whether you serve as a fighter pilot or an artillery soldier, a maintenance officer or a loadmaster, a lawyer or a rifleman, it is not important as you are a member of the armed services and are often placed in harm's way to do a job that very few other people want to do. And in today's military, it doesn't matter what your role, you're likely to end up in a combat zone, ensuring that that missile can fire, that plane can take off, those civilians are safe, that shipping lane is secure, that soldier's wounds are treated, those terrorists are caught or killed. Or as in my case, to ensure that the commander has what he or she needs to make the right decision, oftentimes in a split second. I'm an officer in the United States Air Force, first and foremost. I've had the privilege of serving in Bosnia, Iraq, Guantanamo Bay, Afghanistan, and in other deployed environments. And like most veterans, I've been changed through my experiences. I've often closed my eyes, as I'm sure most veterans have, and I wondered how it is that I'm able to stand here before you today. I wonder how it is that I am a fortunate one to have made it both in and out of combat zones safely. I see myself helping to clear a path for the wounded soldiers being medevaced from the front. I see the bloody bandages wrapping the head of a man with a bullet lodged in his brain, his life now changed forever. I still vividly recall wearing my Kevlar armor, sweat pouring from underneath my helmet, checking my weapon at my side, sitting in the pitch black belly of a fully loaded C-17 Globemaster as it corked down through the Iraqi sky in a combat approach, hoping to avoid surface-to-air missiles that had been fired at previous approaching planes in March of 2003. I affectionately recall my time living in mud up to my knees and on the side of a concrete tarmac with planes and helicopters buzzing around through the black night. And I can still see the glow of bombs dropped over Mosul off in the distance. RPGs being fired in our direction, well beyond a range that was harmful. And I still wonder how it is that I made it out of Kirkuk alive in our little caravan of non-armored vehicles, guns drawn, circling our vehicles as the drivers go in reverse, backing out of what was clearly a wrong turn. I recall my flight out of Iraq, lying on a metal floor after 38 straight hours of activities, exhausted. And I recall my 8 months in Afghanistan, coming home to that little girl, running to the command center to assist, following another round of 107mm rockets landing within the confines of Bagram Air Base, having just killed 4 soldiers just a few hundred meters from where I was standing. I still envision sitting helplessly in the Black Hawk helicopter, receiving ground fire from below and relying on the pilots and door gunners to suppress fire and get us safely to Kabul. And I can still feel the flames and see them burning wreckage of a 747 transport plane having crashed to the ground across the runway from where I worked. I still feel the vibration from the bombs exploding just outside our gates as we executed a close air support mission, saving the lives of our troops on the ground. So my experience may very well pale in comparison to the next veteran with whom each of us speaks. It certainly does when I compare it to a young captain who I saw receive a Purple Heart, injuries received when her convoy was hit by an IED. She controlled her own wounds so that other injured personnel could assist in saving the life of an Army major who was also in that Humvee. Some time ago, I found myself reading the obituaries, not really sure why, the Friday morning edition of the Washington Post, and I came across a story of retired Colonel Melvin Rosen of Falls Church, Virginia. The headline glared, "Melvin H. Rosen survived Bataan Death March." And for any of you familiar with World War II facts and history, you would immediately recognize this as something amazing in and of itself. Young Captain Rosen trudged 65 miles in 4 days without food or water in tropical heat on a road that became littered with the bodies of hundreds of Americans and Filipino prisoners of war. Colonel Rosen was eventually brought to a POW camp in Korea, where he was liberated in September 1945. Colonel Rosen endured crowded, unsanitary, and treacherous conditions and later described his experience during the war as, and I quote, "unimaginably cruel." This is an experience only someone in Colonel Rosen's situation could possibly fathom. However, as a veteran, I share with Colonel Rosen the experience of war. The fact remains, no matter what our individual experiences, no matter what conflict, no matter what time in history, the veteran is bonded together to one another as brothers in arms. So now that I've painstakingly explained how all veterans are quote-unquote the same, and traditional distinctions that society places upon individuals do not apply, I will do just that. I will address a Jewish veteran and how this particular individual is unique in much the same way that the African-American veteran might identify him or herself as unique. Unique in the realistic sense that as a Jew in the American Armed Forces, my perspective naturally differs from that of the majority of soldiers, sailors, coasties, airmen, Marines with whom I serve, simply because I am a Jew. Seymour Brody, a renowned author, once described the Jewish war veteran as an individual in the United States born out of anti-Semitism. I assert that the Jewish veteran was not born out of anti-Semitism, but rather invisibility. When the prestigious magazine Harper's Weekly and North American Review, as well as Mark Twain, wrote that the American Jews did not serve and fight in the Civil War, 78 Jewish veterans of the Union Army met in New York City's Lexington Opera House, not far from where we are, and on March 15, 1896, they refuted these lies by organizing the Hebrew Union Veterans, which is the precursor group to the Jewish war veterans of the United States of America. These veterans had a right to be mad and angry. There were more than 6,000 Jews who served in the Union Army and the Grand Army of the Republic, and with many of them having been killed and wounded. 7 Jews were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and many others received various decorations and medals. And after a year, Mark Twain apologized to the veterans for his perceived anti-Semitic remarks. These 78 Jewish Civil War veterans established a number of bases for their existence. And amongst other things, they pledged to maintain a true allegiance to the United States, to combat anti-Semitism and combat bigotry wherever it originated and whatever the target, to gather and preserve the records of patriotic service performed by men and women of Jewish faith, and honor the memories and shield from neglect the graves of heroic Jewish veterans. And one of the roles of the Jewish veteran today is to never allow memories to falter or history to faithlessly edit us out of existence once again. So in that regard, I return to Colonel Rosen for a moment to share his experience prior to surviving the Bataan Death March. In 1936, he was accepted to and he enrolled in the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, which is, of course, not too far from where we are either. At the time, incoming cadets had to choose between mandatory Catholic services or Protestant services. Colonel Rosen was Jewish. He attended Protestant services. Apparently, Catholic services were right over the edge, a little too much for him. However, every Saturday afternoon, he joined a small group of Jewish cadets who gave up free time, and they had their own voluntary Jewish services in the Protestant chapel's office, in the chaplain's office. And interestingly, this was the genesis of the first Jewish cadet chapel at West Point. So one might ask whether things have changed. Have Americans of Jewish faith who serve in the military been accepted as full-fledged members of the armed services? Obviously, yes. Is there now equality for the Jewish religion within the armed forces so that a military member of the Jewish faith may freely practice his or her religion? Absolutely, yes. There are regulations which preserves one's rights to practice religion freely. However, my experience has shown me that our military's expression and understanding of spirituality are largely defined by those of the Christian faith. And as such, on more than one occasion, I have had to explain why I should have the day to attend Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. The Air Force Academy had been in the news in 2005 after allegations of religious discrimination surfaced. A military study of the religious climate at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado found several examples of religious intolerance, insensitivity, and inappropriate proselytizing on the part of Air Force officers and cadets. Studies showed there was a failure at the Academy to, quote-unquote, fully accommodate all members in needs and a lack of awareness over where the line is drawn between permissible and impermissible expression of beliefs. Sometime later, the Washington Post reported that no significant change had occurred. Now, I disagree with that assessment, but there is always room for improvement. So more specific to my own experience was my assignment to an organization which had a lead role in reviewing the status of detainees at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The Washington, D.C. director of the organization would lead prayer at every organization gathering. Now, this is not an issue for me. In fact, after being in some of the situations I found myself, I understand why many individuals in the armed services turn to faith for support. And I have no problem with the sharing of a non-denominational prayer in under certain circumstances. However, the director's words, "In Jesus Christ's name we pray," offended, marginalized, and to a certain extent isolated me, not just from him, but because of his position from the rest of the organization as well. Here I was feeling invisible within an organization with the sole purpose of performing non-biased reviews over the detainee status of men, most of whom are of the Muslim faith. Regardless of the argument that prayer has nothing to do with a non-biased evaluation of facts, statements, and evidence, I say it was inappropriate. Much of our job in the military today involves perception, and what perception were we giving, expressing our religious preferences in this manner? Now, don't get me wrong, there have been wonderful times in both Guam and Germany, communities of both military personnel and civilians bonded together over Shabbat services and dinner. In Bosnia, I was granted permission from my command to have the unique pleasure of attending Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at a Sephardic synagogue in downtown Sarajevo. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, I have my choice of a kosher MRE, which I do not advise anyone, especially the bat mitzvah girl, you may not go again for like months. Don't have an MRE. Very bad. Meals ready to eat. Right? They were kosher, though, so that had to make it good. It didn't. So for my Passover meal, that was interesting. But in Cuba, my commander joined me for Passover. It was his first Passover, and he graciously turned down my offer of a second gefilte fish. I don't know why. I know this whole room would like gefilte fish right after we're done speaking. He did, however, ask for some more matzo ball soup, so I consider that a win. Has the military changed? Yes. However, we all must realize, regardless of our faith, that our nation's military is not just a Christian military, it's not just a Jewish military, it is not a military of any particular faith. In fact, its diversity is one of the things that makes it so special. And each of us has a responsibility to ensure it remains that way. So why have I chosen to be and remain a member of the armed forces of the United States of America? I had to decide how I wanted my life to progress and what things were important to me. It's ironic in a sense that I'm speaking with you on this Shabbat. God says that I know Abraham will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of God and do tzedakah and justice. And for this he will be rewarded. Indeed, as we've heard, this week's Torah portion is replete with examples of Abraham's charity or righteousness, a trait which Abraham cultivated to the extent that it came to define his very identity. In this Shabbat, God reveals himself to Abraham, and Abraham subsequently pleads with God to spare the wicked city of Sodom. It's the parsha when God fulfills his promise to Sarah by giving her and Abraham a son, Isaac. God then tests Abraham's devotion by commanding him to sacrifice Isaac. And as Abraham raises the knife to slaughter his son, a voice from heaven calls to stop him. And what does he find in the undergrowth? Of course, the lamb is offered in Isaac's place. It's the same parsha where Abraham and his nephew Lot both had herds and flocks. And there wasn't enough land in Canaan. And Abraham gave Lot the better of the choices. He didn't have to. He was a senior person. He was a senior. And instead he elected to give Lot the first choice of territory. And he was content with whatever remained. Do nothing from selfishness, says God, or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. It's the most difficult task to want personal goodness for non-personal gain. This was a challenge set out before Abraham, and it's a challenge that each one of us faces every day in our lives. So this parsha is ultimately about making the right decisions. God provided each of us an ability, and each of us must take that ability and do the right thing just as Abraham did. One can live with decisions for evil purposes and self-promoting gain. It is a matter of how one chooses to live life. Our decisions lead us to reward not because we want it, but because God wants us to have it. Judaism teaches the supreme value of life, yet it also teaches us that sometimes conflict is necessary to achieve the ultimate goal of peace. Never have any of us, at least those in my generation, had to wake up and wonder whether our relatives were buried in a mass grave outside of New York City. We haven't had to concern ourselves with truly taking action before it is too late. Today, most Westerners grow up in nice neighborhoods. They never experience war or real suffering, or in the case of Jews, anti-Semitism. Therefore, it is easy to proclaim brotherhood, peace, and other notions at the expense of defense. It is also very easy for those who have had to grow up in environments of conflict to forget about the notion of communication and dialogue and resolving one's problems through means other than conflict. It's a fine line that we tread every day. And my experiences, good and bad, have taught me the importance of placing oneself in the shoes of another before deciding in which direction to progress. So if one asks my parents about my decision-making history, they might say that I've made many of my decisions throughout my life unencumbered by the thought process. But they might also say that I've made at least 2 correct decisions. One was really my wife's because she chose to marry me. That one technically doesn't count. It was her decision. But the decision that my parents might say was my best was joining the Air Force. So on Guam and in Germany, I saw the remnants of World War II. I've deployed to Bosnia, Herzegovina, where I saw the ravages of war 10 years after conflict, which killed so many in the Balkans. I've seen the devastation caused by people killing each other for one purpose, hatred of those from a different religion. I've been to Iraq, and I've spoken with families who were destroyed in chemical attacks. I was in Iraq when the mass graves were discovered not far from my location outside of Mosul. I've watched the pain on men's faces as they told story after story of loved ones disappearing forever under the regime of Saddam Hussein. I've been to Afghanistan where we worked so hard to create new opportunities for all persons. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to be thanked for bestowing freedom upon a people and a nation. So in reflection, it's quite ironic for me as a Jewish veteran to be in a sense more connected with the Iraqis than most of my own fellow American veterans, in that my own relatives have died by the horror of poison gases and their remains desecrated in mass graves. I've had the unique opportunity to see the good that our military has performed, the death our military has prevented, the life our military has preserved, and I've seen the children to whom our military has offered a future. So regardless of the politics involved or the realities of war, I have seen the good. So we Jews have been characterized as the conscience of the world, a living reminder of the importance of tolerance and equality enshrined in the abstract in our Torah, and the U.S. Constitution. As a Jewish veteran, I am the symbol and a reminder within our military of equality, and in my service to our nation, I am a fighter against all those who would deny by force the right of equality and the other rights which are endowed by God. To sum up, the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C. has an audio testimony, and it plays as follows. A man spoke. One day, I saw my friend Chaim. He was praying. It was too late for the morning service and too early for the afternoon service. I asked him, Chaim, what are you praying? He responded, I am thanking God. I asked him, Chaim, look around you. You're in a death camp. People are being tortured. They're dying. What do you possibly have to thank God for? Replies Chaim, I am thanking God I am one of us and not one of them. I serve in the armed forces because in my small way and in similar fashion to the wonderful veterans before me, I believe I can make a difference, and I always want to be one of us and not one of them. So to sum up, I'm ending, because my wife was unable to make it, with one of her favorite writings, and I'm sure most of the folks in this room have heard this. I am a Jew because my faith demands no abdication of the mind. I am a Jew because my faith demands all the devotion of my heart. I am a Jew because wherever there is suffering, the Jew weeps. I am a Jew because whenever there is despair, the Jew hopes. I am a Jew because the message of our faith is the oldest and the newest. I am a Jew because the promise of our faith is a universal promise. I am a Jew because for the Jew, the world is not completed. People, you must complete it. I am a Jew, and you, my young lady. I am a Jew because for the Jew, humanity is not fully created. People must create it. I am a Jew because the faith of the people of Israel places humanity above nations and above Judaism itself. And I am a Jew because the faith of the people of Israel places above humanity image of the divine and the oneness of God. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope that my speaking and your listening ended at about the same time, but I truly appreciate this honor. Thank you.
Colonel Leff, thank you for your service and thank you for the speech. I'm left both with the image of the Jewish army screaming, Oy vey! And also with the reminder that of the service you and all of our veterans performed so that we might be able to congregate freely here and in all of our lives. I ask everyone now to please rise for the Musaf service, page 155.